The courtroom was noisy as Judge Samuel Grayson banged his gavel, quieting the crowd. The gallery laughed, a short, mocking sound as he brushed off her opening statement with a wave of his hand. "Enough with the preamble, Ms. Bondi," he said, his voice rough and loud enough to fill the room. Pam Bondi stood still, her back straight, her eyes steady. She'd been in tough cases before, faced strong opponents, and always came out on top, even if it was hard. Today wouldn't be different. Here's how she turned a skeptical crowd into one that respected her, winning a case that seemed lost from the start. Pam Bondi walked into the courtroom with the confidence she carried every day. Shoulders back, head up, steps firm. The room felt tense, filled with the smell of polished wood and the faint sweat of nervous people. For her, this was a regular workday, another case to argue, another chance to prove she was the best lawyer there. She'd handled dozens of judges, some fair, some not, and outsmarted plenty of attorneys who thought they could beat her. She'd won more cases than most could count. This was her job, demanding and driven by facts. But today, something felt off. It wasn't just the case, a contract dispute with serious stakes, but the way Judge Grayson glanced at her when she entered, a small, smug look that suggested he'd already decided against her. The room was full of quiet tension. Attorneys moved their papers around, their fingers restless as they looked between the judge's bench and the defendant's table. Pam's client sat next to her, a thin man in a worn gray suit, his fingers tapping quickly on the table. His name was Tom Wheeler, a contractor who'd gotten mixed up with a dishonest company. He'd been in Grayson's court before, a year ago, over a minor zoning issue, but this was Pam's first time representing him. She'd heard about Judge Samuel Grayson, a man known for quick decisions and harsh words, someone who enjoyed making lawyers feel small. Her paralegal had warned her that morning over coffee. Grayson liked to push people around, especially those new to his courtroom. Pam wasn't worried. She'd dealt with difficult people before and always found a way to win. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, his voice loud and clear, stopping the chatter. The room focused, chairs creaking as people sat up straight, all attention on the judge. Judge Samuel Grayson sat down, an older man with gray hair and a face marked by years of courtroom arguments. Deep lines around his mouth, a strong jaw. He adjusted his glasses, looking at Pam over the rims with a smirk that showed he didn't take her seriously. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his voice rough and tinged with sarcasm, saying her name like it was a joke. "I trust you understand this case you've brought me. No surprises, all right? I've got a busy day, and I don't have time for nonsense." Pam sat up straighter, her hands resting on her legal pad, its edges worn from hours of work. "I understand completely, Your Honor," she said, her voice calm and professional, not giving him any reaction. "We're ready to start." "Good," he replied, leaning back in his chair as if he'd already settled everything. "Some people don't know how things work here." He glanced at the opposing counsel, a polished man in his 40s with an expensive tie and a wide grin, then chuckled dryly. "Let's keep this short. We all know how it's going to end." Pam felt a surge of irritation, her hands tightening slightly. Grayson wasn't even trying to be fair. He'd made up his mind before she'd said anything, and his comment was meant to dismiss her. She took a slow breath, her fingers touching the edge of her notes to steady herself. Stay calm, she thought, keeping her focus. To him, this was a game to show off his power. To her, it was serious. Her client's future, her reputation, her responsibility. She looked at him, seeing the arrogance in his eyes, daring her to give up. She wouldn't. "You've got the floor, Miss Bondi," he said, his tone more a command than an offer, expecting her to stumble. Pam stood, adjusting her blazer, a navy blue one, neatly pressed, and waited a moment for the room to settle. The gallery was crowded with people watching, some who came regularly for courtroom drama, others just passing time. They expected her to fail, waiting for Grayson to shut her down. She nodded at him briefly and began. "The facts are clear, Your Honor. The law supports us and the evidence proves it. The prosecution says my client broke a contract, but—" "Ms. Bondi," Grayson cut in, his voice harsh and loud, stopping her mid-sentence. "Spare me the speech. I've heard enough introductions in my time." He gestured toward the opposing counsel, Harris, she'd noted from the docket, his smirk growing as if he'd won already. "You're wasting my time. We know how this ends. Get to the point." The room went quiet, everyone holding their breath. A few attorneys exchanged looks, small smiles showing they'd seen this before. Pam sensed the room doubting her, their uncertainty heavy around her. The gallery laughed quietly, the sound sharp and annoying, but she didn't react. She stood still, her eyes fixed on Grayson. This wasn't just another case now. It was a challenge, and she'd see it through. Grayson leaned back, hands folded, watching her with a bored expression meant to unsettle her. His attitude was clear, but she'd handled worse, and kept going. Harris sat relaxed, his grin spreading, confident he'd already succeeded. The gallery's whispers got louder, some sounding sorry for her, others amused, betting on her failure. "You know," Grayson said, his voice heavy with sarcasm, "this could have been settled weeks ago, Ms. Bondi. No need for all this performance." He stretched out the last word, earning a few laughs from the crowd. Pam's heart beat faster, but she controlled it. She'd dealt with people like him before, those who thought they could shake her with words. It wouldn't work. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and strong, breaking through his taunt. "I'm not here to perform, I'm here to present the truth." The room grew tense, a small change she noticed. People shifted in their seats, some paying closer attention, others looking curious instead of bored. This was her chance, not just to win the case, but to prove Grayson wrong and make him regret doubting her. She wasn't new to this. She was experienced, and she'd show it. Grayson huffed, interrupting her again before she could continue. "Let's be honest, Miss Bondi. The prosecution's case is solid, tight and complete. You're reaching for nothing, and I've got other work to do. We've seen this before. Move it along." Pam's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she stayed in place, firm and unmoved. "With respect, Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but forceful, "every case is different. The law doesn't accept quick assumptions. There's evidence here, details you're ignoring that changes everything." He laughed, a short, loud sound that bounced around the room, pulling more chuckles from the gallery. "This isn't a classroom, Miss Bondi," he said, his tone sharp. "No points for creative arguments or long explanations. You've got 10 minutes, use them or we're finished." 10 minutes. A trick to pressure her, a short deadline to make her nervous. But Pam didn't panic. It only made her more determined. She nodded, looking straight at him. 10 minutes is plenty, Your Honor," she said, her voice calm, a quiet statement of her resolve. The clock seemed louder in her mind, each tick pushing her forward. The gallery's amusement faded as she stood taller, her focus clear and strong. She wasn't just defending Tom Wheeler now, the man fidgeting next to her, his future depending on her. She was proving a point to everyone who'd ever doubted her. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and firm, cutting through the room's noise. "You've already decided, I can tell. But I'm asking you to wait. The prosecution says my client failed a contract, but they've hidden evidence. Facts I'll show you now that proves they set him up to lose from the beginning." Grayson raised an eyebrow, his doubt obvious, but there was a hint of interest in his look. "Evidence?" he said, leaning forward a bit. "What, some last-second trick you found late last night?" "No trick," Pam replied, her voice steady, meeting his question directly. "Facts they didn't want us to see. Facts that show my client was meant to fail." She glanced at Harris, who moved uncomfortably, his grin fading. "They've distorted the contract's terms, deliberately, and left out details that prove it." Grayson's fingers tapped the desk, a small sign he was listening, even if he didn't want to show it. The room got quieter, the mood shifting as Pam continued, her words precise and direct. "Court decisions support this. Johnson v. Pierce, 2018 from the Fifth Circuit. A breach isn't valid if the other side makes it impossible to succeed." The gallery paid attention now, their interest growing as the case got serious. Grayson's smirk lessened, his eyes narrowing slightly, rethinking her. Harris wrote notes quickly, his confidence slipping, his hands sweaty. Pam spoke at her own pace, turning a page in her legal pad carefully, staying in control. "Here's the key part, Your Honor," she said, her voice rising slightly to hold everyone's focus. "They didn't just misunderstand the contract. They hid a memo dated 3 weeks before this started that shows they knew my client couldn't meet their demands. They planned for him to fail." A quick gasp spread through the gallery, surprise moving across the crowd. Grayson's hand stopped tapping, his eyes squinting, his expression tightening with suspicion. "A memo?" he said, his voice quiet but firm, challenging her. "You'd better have it with you, Ms. Bondi, or this is just talk." "I have it," she said, pulling a clean copy from her papers and holding it up, the page bright under the lights. "Signed by their vice president, dated March 15th, 3 weeks before they ended the deal." Harris stood suddenly, his face pale, sweat on his brow. "Objection, Your Honor," he said loudly, his voice unsteady. This wasn't shared in discovery. This is unfair. Pam stayed calm. It wasn't shared, because they buried it in a stack of useless papers 2 days ago, she said, her voice flat and sharp. They thought we wouldn't find it. Too bad. I don't overlook things. Grayson leaned forward, his earlier boredom gone, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. Give it to me, he said, pointing to the bailiff. Pam handed the memo over, her heart beat even despite the high stakes. Tom's life, her reputation, everything on this paper. The bailiff walked across the room, his shoes loud on the floor, and gave it to Grayson. Everyone waited as he read it, his forehead wrinkling more with each line, his mouth a straight line. She'd just given him something big, and he couldn't ignore it. This changes the picture, Grayson said quietly, almost to himself, looking at the memo. He turned to Harris, who was sweating heavily now, his tie loose. You've got something to say about this, Mr. Harris? Because it doesn't look good. Harris stumbled over his words, his voice weak. Your Honor, we didn't think it was important. It's just office talk. Not important, Pam interrupted, her voice firm and clear. It's the core of the case, Your Honor. They knew my client had no chance, knew it and counted on us missing it. That's not talk, it's evidence. The gallery grew noisy, a mix of shock and interest, the mood shifting strongly toward her. Grayson rubbed his temple, showing he was rattled for the first time, a weakness she could use. All right, Ms. Bondi, he said, his voice reluctant but focused. You've got my attention, keep going. Show me more. Pam nodded, taking the chance, setting her pen down after a brief grip. Thank you, Your Honor, she said, her voice even but strong. This isn't just a mistake. It's intentional bad faith. They misled my client, set up the deal to fail, and thought they'd get away with it. The law doesn't allow that, not while I'm here. She listed court cases, her voice steady, each one clear and solid. Miller v. Thompson, 2009, about equitable estoppel. Davis v. Klein, 2015, on bad faith. Harris fidgeted, his notes messy, his earlier confidence gone. Grayson listened, his hands still, his eyes on her, not checking the time anymore. The room was hers now, fully focused on her. The gallery's earlier amusement was gone, replaced by serious attention, some taking notes as if it mattered. Pam felt their focus, driving her forward, building on the determination she'd had since the start. She wasn't just winning, she was changing their minds, proving them wrong. Your Honor, she said, pausing briefly to emphasize, they didn't just stretch the rules, they broke them and hid it. That memo shows they never intended a fair deal. My client deserves fairness, not a trap. Grayson's look grew serious, shifting to Harris. You've got 5 minutes to explain this, counselor, he said, his voice low and tense. Make it convincing because you're in trouble. Harris struggled, his voice unsteady as he tried to respond, hands shaking as he looked through his notes. Your Honor, this memo, it's misunderstood. We didn't mislead anyone. The terms were clear. Clear? Pam cut in, her voice cold and direct, stopping him. Clear to who, Mr. Harris? Not my client, who trusted you, who signed thinking he could succeed. You offered a deal you knew he'd lose. The gallery murmured, some agreeing now, the atmosphere changing. Grayson raised his hand, stopping Harris. Enough, he said, his voice firm. I've heard enough, maybe too much. He leaned back, his expression blank, thinking it over. The room went silent, the quiet heavy. Pam stood steady, Tom's tapping the only noise. Tap, 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 a nervous rhythm next to her. She'd presented everything, facts, law, determination. Now it was Grayson's decision, and everyone waited. After a long pause, 2 minutes that felt endless, he spoke, his voice quiet but certain. Mr. Bondi, you've built a strong case, he said, looking at the memo in his hand. This memo, it's hard to ignore. I see what it means. Pam nodded, her face unchanged, her hands calm. Thank you, Your Honor, she said, keeping her tone even. But, he added, waiting a moment, I'm not convinced yet. The prosecution's right. Contracts aren't favors, and people agree to them. I need to think about this. Her heart skipped, but she hid it, her expression steady. Grayson wasn't agreeing yet. He was holding off, testing her patience. She wouldn't break. She'd handled longer waits. I'll consider it overnight, he said, hitting the gavel hard. We're back tomorrow, 9 sharp. Be here. The room breathed out, the tension easing. Tom slumped, relief and worry in his eyes, his tapping slowing. Are we okay? He whispered. We're close, Pam said quietly, packing her briefcase quickly. Her mind was already planning the next step. This wasn't finished. Outside, the hallway was loud with footsteps and voices. Reporters crowded her, mics close as she moved through. "Ms. Bondi, did you expect Grayson to delay?" one asked, a man in a plain suit. She gave a small smile, looking past him. "I'm prepared for anything," she said, her voice calm. "That's why I'll be back tomorrow." Another reporter, a woman with quick eyes, stepped in. "Was the memo a turning point?" "It's the truth," Pam said, moving aside. "And the truth matters." She reached the elevators, her heels loud on the floor. That night, Pam stayed in her office, city lights outside the window. Papers covered her desk, her laptop open to case files, coffee cold beside her. She reviewed everything, following a feeling she'd had since the memo. Then she remembered. A late-night call, a nervous voice with more information about the prosecution. His name was Daniel Kent, a former manager who'd left their company 6 months ago. She'd called him at 1 a.m., pacing as she spoke, calming him down. "They hurt me too," he'd said. "I have emails, dates, things they want hidden." "You're my key," she told him, her voice firm. "Can you do this?" Yes," he'd said. "For you?" "Yes." The next morning the courtroom was tense, the air charged. Grayson sat down, his face serious, glasses low. The gallery was fuller. News of the memo bringing more people. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his voice rough, "anything else before I decide? Last chance." "Yes, Your Honor," she said, standing smoothly, her blazer still neat. "I have a witness, Daniel Kent, a former manager for the prosecution's company. He knows their dishonest tactics, details that connect everything." Harris jumped up, his chair scraping the floor. "Objection," he shouted, his voice high. "This is a trick, Your Honor, a last-second move." "Overruled," Grayson said sharply, his eyes alert. "Sit down, Mr. Harris. I want to hear it." Kent walked in, nervous in a wrinkled shirt, sweat on his face. He took the stand, hands moving as the bailiff swore him in, looking to Pam for support. She approached, her voice calm, leading him gently. "Mr. Kent, what was your job at Carver Construction?" "Project manager," he said, swallowing. "I handled contracts, schedules, kept things moving." "What did you see with Tom Wheeler's deal?" she asked, her tone steady. They planned it," he said, his voice shaky but growing stronger. "Told us to hide things, set impossible deadlines, changed requirements suddenly. I have emails." "The VP approved it, said let him fail." The gallery reacted, a quick sound of surprise. Pam gave the bailiff a stack of papers. "Emails, dates, proof." "Exhibit B, Your Honor," she said clearly. "Evidence they set him up." Harris's face went pale, his hands tight on the table. Grayson looked at the emails, his forehead creasing, his mouth firm. "Is this accurate, Kent?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes, sir," Kent said, nodding. "I left because I couldn't stand it." Grayson's eyes narrowed as Kent left the stand, the room noisy with reaction. "That's quite a story," he said, his tone dry but shaken. "Mr. Harris, nothing to add?" Harris spoke softly, sinking down. We question his reliability, Your Honor. He's upset." "Too late," Pam said, her voice strong. "He has proof. Dates, names, signatures. They tricked my client, and Kent shows it." Grayson rubbed his chin, the room waiting, the tension strong. "I've heard enough," he said, his voice solid. "I'm ruling for the plaintiff. The prosecution's actions are wrong, memo, witness, all of it. Ms. Bondi, you win." A cheer started in the gallery, stopped by the bailiff's look. Tom took Pam's hand, his voice quiet with relief. "Thank you. I thought they'd ruin me." She nodded, calm but proud inside. "We did it," she said, letting go after a brief squeeze. Grayson spoke again. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his tone softer, "you're tough. Not many challenge me and win. Good job." "Very good." She looked at him, steady. "Just doing my work, Your Honor," she said, keeping it simple. As the room cleared, Pam packed up, briefcase closing, papers organized, the pressure fading. She'd changed their doubts to respect, not just for Tom, but for every time someone thought she'd fail. Walking out, head up, her heels loud on the tile, she knew no one would question her again. Outside, the sun was bright, the city sounds distant. She stopped on the steps, feeling the victory, not just the case, but the effort. Her phone buzzed. Messages from her team, a great work, from her paralegal, but she waited. This was her moment. She'd earned it. Pam's fight wasn't just about a contract. It was a lesson for anyone listening. Life throws skeptics and obstacles at you, but persistence can silence them. The truth, no matter how buried, has power when you dig for it. And believing in yourself even when no one else does builds a strength nothing can shake. She adjusted her blazer, took a deep breath, and walked on, ready for the next challenge, knowing she'd never back down.